Okay, so when I was about 20, a 20-year-old undergraduate student, I lost my home. My husband and I had fallen on financial hardship because working really hard on my finals, I got pregnant, and then I could not work because of threatened miscarriage and then premature labor. And on the day that we were expelled, we waited outside for the council to decide whether I was indeed homeless, whether I had made myself intentionally homeless, and whether I was deserving of a home. Now I want you to picture this. So please imagine that you are standing outside what used to be your home, and you have the few pieces of furniture that you own as a 20-year-old scattered on the pavement, and you have in your arm a small baby who, as predicted, was born prematurely, and you are trying to make sure that they are warm, and you are waiting. How might you be feeling? What kind of thoughts are going through your mind? Well, I will tell you what went through mine. The phrase intentionally homeless resonated in my head, and then I started to wonder. I wondered whether I was to blame. I wondered whether I had in fact not wanted to carry my baby to term. I wondered whether the skepticism of the council was warranted. And I wondered whether I was deserving of a home. I was waiting, and I was waiting for someone to take me home. But not only in the physical sense, because home was what I knew, and what was real was home. And in this moment, I have never felt so exposed and ashamed and powerless and vulnerable in my sense of sanity. Now, as a therapist, I have been doing sociopolitically and feminist-informed work, primarily with women of color, and I started to recognize glimpses of my experience in the stories of subtle racism that women had entrusted me with. And I started to make the connection, of course. And it is this connection that I would like to speak to you all about today. And specifically to put to you that our capacity to have a home is dependent on our capacity to know. Or conversely, that our capacity to know is dependent on our capacity to have a home. But before I go on to explain, I need to start off with some definitions. So firstly, homelessness. And I take it to mean the condition of being without a permanent dwelling or the experience of feeling left without safe, adequate, or secure housing. The second concept we need to think about is epistemic injustice. And epistemic is a fancy word, isn't it? A little bit. Well, where I come from it is fancy anyway. But actually what it means is things that are to do with knowing and knowledge and understanding the world. And Miranda Fricker proposes that epistemic injustice is done to us when we are wronged in our capacity to know or in our capacity to contribute to knowledge. The final concept that might be helpful to bear in mind is that of ontological insecurity. And ontological insecurity refers to people's sense of security or insecurity about their being in the world. It is conceptualized as a sense of intense anxiety or dread, which result from being unable to give meaning to the event that happened in a life, or when we struggle with knowing the reality or the existence of things, of others, and of the world. So, let's go back to that connection. Our capacity to know is dependent on our capacity to have a home. So let's think about this. We know that both home and knowing provide a sense of safety and security in time and in space. We know that both home and knowing delineate boundaries, boundaries between us and the world, boundaries between the in and the out, boundaries between the known and the unknown. And we know that both home and knowing provide a frame, whether epistemic, cognitive, or physical. And finally, I would suggest that home and knowing both ground us and anchor us. But that's not all, and that is something else, and something quite significant. And I suggest that it is power. Because in the same way that physical homelessness requires power inequality to work, as it is usually people with more social power who can displace us and then decide whether we are entitled to be housed or not. Epistemic homelessness also requires power to operate. Maybe, I'm sure that many of us today would have experienced this in the context of social oppression. Some might refer to such experience as microaggression. So let's say maybe you are in the queue and the white person behind you gets served before you. Or maybe as a brown or black body, you are complimented on how well you speak English, or indeed French. Or perhaps you enter a white space and you get hit by the gaze. And it is said, without being said, that you are trespassing, that your body does not belong. And you feel hit in your guts. And you know. But as soon as you feel the violence, particularly if you try to name the violence, it is usually denied by people with more social power. And so you might be told that you have a chip on your shoulder, that you are paranoid. And if you show any sign of distress or offense, or God forbid, anger, you will be duly invited to respond more appropriately. And it is at this time that you may start to doubt yourself, that your epistemic confidence might get hit. That is your confidence in your capacity to know. So you might start to wonder, is it me? Am I the problem? Am I fabricating the problem? Because in the word of Sarah Ahmed, when we speak of a problem, we become a problem. And then you might think, am I going mad? Now, all the stories that were shared with me in therapy had epistemic homelessness as a theme. Whether there were stories of work contribution being overlooked, or stories of invisibilized pain, stories of being forced into stereotypes, and stories about struggling to break free. All the stories that I heard were stories of denial and invalidation. Each and every one of the stories that I heard were a story of the normalization of the said denial and invalidation. You see, because certain racism cannot be seen easily, particularly by people who do not experience it, it is easily denied. Because, again, it cannot be seen. You cannot see what you are unwilling to see. And you cannot see what you have been programmed not to see. and not every phenomenon that are or is in existence can be seen. But I have seen the distress, and I have seen the subtle oppression, and I have experienced it too. But of course, that's not enough. I am a final year doctoral student, and therefore the importance of evidence and of having a scientific, inquiring mind cannot be overstated. And so in my search for truth, I did what all scientists would do, of course. I turned to Twitter. And then I ran a few polls. And the first question, which was answered by 549 people, asked whether people of color experience covert racism and overt racism as equally challenging. And the results suggested that covert racism was experienced about 7 times more challenging. The second question was answered by 336 people and was asking about the experience of those who had spoken out about their experience of subtle oppression, subtle racism in particular. And so I wanted to know what had happened to them. Results indicated that 95% of people of color who had spoken about their experience of subtle racism had been either ignored, ridiculed, or simply disbelieved, leaving only 5% of those who had taken the poll saying that they had been believed or that they had been treated kindly. The last poll was curious to find out what the impact of this denial, of this epistemic injustice was on people of color. And a wide range of responses were reported. The first one, which was answered by 36% of those who took the poll, was feeling as though one is losing one's mind. And the second question, answered by about 32% of those who took the poll, was feeling in pain and in distress. Now, as I said, there was a wide range of response. So some of the response included feeling anger, feeling rage, feeling fury, feeling helpless, feeling powerlessness, feeling exhaustion, feeling tired, and also feeling gaslighted. One participant named Pauline Meyers described her experience as follows. She said that it is feeling like a stranger in a familiar land with no support and no anchor. And when I read those words, I got goosebumps. Because when I was reflecting on my experience and the experience of people of color, it was the image and the word anchor that kept coming to mind. And my definition was already centered around it. So I would like to suggest that epistemic homelessness is the subjective experience of losing anchor in situation of epistemic injustice. That it is a sense of being displaced from one's truth base. That it is, if you like, a mediating variable between epistemic confidence and ontological insecurity. Now, where do we go from here? The research evidence, and not just Twitter evidence, suggests that covert racism is at least as distressing, if not more, than more overt classes of racism. And so I would like to leave some strategies that women of color in particular and other marginalized people may want to attempt to support themselves with their experience of epistemic homelessness. And the first one is trust your experience. As marginalized people, we are socialized to distrust and be suspicious of our mind, of our bodies, of our competence, of our capacity to know, all of which can undermine our epistemic confidence and make it easier for us to experience epistemic homelessness. So what I always say is that trusting our lived experience is a vital act of resistance. So get to know your truth signals. Trust them, because the chances are they will point you in the right direction, the direction of home. The second strategy, when your reality is being denied and you are facing epistemic injustice, take a socio-political view of the situation and ask yourself not only what is happening in the here and now, but also what is being reproduced sociopolitically. Think about who is deemed to be the knower in the situation. Think about where power lies. And remember that the ultimate power is the power to define. And we have that power. So let's define the world, and let's define our experience. Number 3, you do not need to make your lived experience and your lived reality subject to approval, subject to agreement, subject to debate. So this is something that all of us perhaps need to learn and impact, because making our experience and our reality subject to debate and putting it on the table means that we are opening ourselves to the possibility of our life and what we feel and what we experience being subject to disagreement. And I don't think we need to compromise on what it is that we are experiencing. Finally, if you do lose your home, and perhaps you are heading towards ontological insecurity, or perhaps you're already there, please seek support, seek refuge from people who will not only honor your home and provide refuge, but help you find your way back there. Thank you.